All right, everyone, so I am back, and we were talking about the nail curvature, which, just so you know, the more the matrix is curved, the more the free edge of the nail, which is the piece that we see and we clip, is going to become curved. If the nail curvature is serious, it can potentially lead to ingrown fingernails or toenails. You tend to see it more in the toenails, and you have to take extreme care when working with this. Increased curvature, it can range from mild to severe pinching of the soft tissue of the free edge. In some cases, the free edge pinches the sidewall into a deep curve. This is known as pincher nail. Pincher nail is also known as trumpet nail. The nail can also curve in on itself. And they may be deformed only on the sidewall or edges of the nail plate, or they may curve around to form the shape of a trumpet or sharp cone in the free edge. In each of these cases, the natural nail plate should be carefully trimmed and filed. Extreme or unusual cases should be referred to a qualified medical doctor or podiatrist. This is because if it's very, very severe, there could be a high risk of causing more damage than is already happening. And this is where we have to kind of get used to saying no. Saying no, but the key point is explaining why, is always very important as a professional. Because if you don't say no and you're too uncomfortable to say no, what could happen is and I know this from a personal experience, we're always afraid to say no because we don't want to hurt the client's feelings. We go into this profession because we're people pleasers. So when we say no, we feel bad. But in some cases, if you say no, you're not only protecting yourself, but you're protecting the client. So it's a win-win. The client is safe, and sometimes doing nothing is the safest thing that you can do. I would rather have it that you refer them out to a dermatologist. They, They potentially have, I don't want to say get it wrong, but you know what I mean. They go to the dermatologist or podiatrist, and the podiatrist explains no to them, or they will give them more options that they're legally able to do. You're also protecting your license because you can lose your license if you try to go above federal law. So that is going to be it for the curvature and the disorders. Now we're going to start talking about the diseases, which are the nail infections. So one of the key points to take away from nail infections, and I thought this was really interesting, is that you tend to find more fungal infections on the toenails, and you find more bacterial infections on the nail. So there's different reasons for this, but if you think about it scientifically, I actually understood this. Our feet, and this really depends on where you live, they tend to be enclosed in socks and in shoes, and if you don't have a good pair of breathable shoes, you tend to have a lot of moisture in there, and that creates the ideal breeding ground for fungi. It's warm, it's damp, it's dark. That's where fungi grow and prosper. As opposed to our fingernails, we're always working with our hands, we have more cuts. Fungi may not necessarily like our fingernails, but bacterial, which are pretty opportunistic and different species can live in different conditions, are able to prosper there. And that's why it's more common to get bacterial infections of our fingernails. And it's also why it's important to make sure you're practicing good hygiene and you're using good quality soap, because if your skin is very dry, you're going to dry your hands out and you're going to put yourself at risk for a greater infection. That's why our acid mantle, the oil, it's there for a reason. It helps to mitigate bad bacteria. So nail fungi are very concerning in the salon. They're contagious. They can be transmitted through contaminated implements. They spread from nail to nail in the client's feet, but it's unlikely they're going to be on the fingernails, like I just said. Here's where I thought was really interesting in the text. It says it's extremely unlikely that a cosmetologist could become infected from a client, but it's possible to transmit the fungal infections from one's client's foot or toe to another client. This is also very important with the whole whirlpool bath. A lot of cosmetology schools, mine included, they removed their whirlpool bath because it was just so tough to clean. And actually at one point they found that there was an entire layer of gunk of all the gross skin shavings, toenails, residues, all those gross things that got caught up in there. All I can say is that it will ruin feta and cottage cheese for you. That's how gross it was. I know it ruined that for me. You want to practice good hygiene, and for just a refresher on that, go back to chapter 5 to review that, as well as my previous video where I went over the basic principles. Here's another really interesting thing. It gives you the picture of Pseudomonas aeruginosa, also known as P. aeruginosa, and that's a bacterial infection. Pseudomonas has like a greenish cast to it, and that's even on the culture, and it smells kind of like grapey. That's the bacteria that you tend to find on the, bed sores. So, you want to do proper cleaning, completely disinfect everything. They give you a little caution there, and that tells you how to go over everything. It's like a little refresher of chapter 5. In the past, here was really interesting. Discolorations of the nail plate, especially those between the nail plate and nail enhancements, were incorrectly referred to as molds. So part of the reason that they were called molds was that we really didn't have a better scientific understanding of what a mold was or what a true pathology was. And they may still be used today. Molds are something that you're really going to find on like wet books, water damage, also known as mildew. It's not going to be a human pathogen. So the term should not be used when referring to infection of the fingernails or toenails. Usually the discoloration is a bacterial infection such as Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which is one of several common bacteria that cause a fingernail infection. The other one is Staph aureus, which is also commonly known as the staph infection bacteria or MRSA. These naturally occurring skin bacteria can grow rapidly to cause an infection if the conditions are correct for growth. Bacterial infections are more likely to be the cause of infection of the hands, but can also be found on the feet. Bacteria do not need the same growing conditions as fungal organisms, and they can thrive on the fingernails just as easily as they can on the feet. Infection can be caused by bad cleaning practices, contaminated implements that contain a large number of these bacteria. These infections are not a result of moisture trapped between the natural nail and nail enhancements. That's a myth. Water does not cause infections. Infections are caused by a large number of bacterial and fungal organisms on the surface. And I kind of want to add a little bit more on this statement because I don't necessarily agree with that. While water does not cause bacterial infections, two things can happen. If the water is contaminated, like stagnant, and you're soaking your implements in it with previous biomaterial, that's going to cause a higher number of bacteria, and that's where it can become a risk. But if you practice all the cleaning procedures like you should normally do, having a little bit of moisture between the nail enhancement and the nail is not going to cause an infection. I have seen in recent years, and I do want to give a big shout out to my friend Maddie. She shared she's also an amazing makeup artist, by the way. I want to add that in there if you're from the Jersey area. She shared a picture of one of these trends, or I call it an improper practice, where people are dipping their nail in like the nail enhancement powder or whatever, and it caused a serious infection. That's really gross because I know people think that if we dip into a high pH, it'll prevent or a powder, it'll prevent infection. That's not true. You do not want to get in the habit of dipping your hands in everything. I mean, how would you feel if you had an esthetician stick their hands or the client's hands in a moisturizer and you're using that on different clients? Over time, it's going to get spoiled and have a high amount of bacteria. So this is another topic I want to bring up. If you have professional products that you're seeing being diverged, that's actually one of the risks, is actually getting a bacterial infection from that, because you don't know if that product is real, if it's been adulterated, if it's been touched by human hands, because something that's been touched by human hands, the bacteria in there are going to grow slowly and it's going to decrease the effectiveness of the product. So after the sell-by timeline has gone by, what's going to happen is the product is going to become filled with bacteria, and if you're, let's say, have a cut or you have a bad immune system, or heaven forbid are going through chemotherapy, that stuff can get in the cut and cause a bad infection. And that's why it's very careful. You have to be very careful on where you're getting your products from. Just had to add that in there. I do want to also mention that some of the bacteria or fungi can even be found at the beach. There is a nail fungus that can discolor the nails. I have the worst habit of sticking my feet in the sand, digging it under, or if you're gardening, I love to get my hands dirty like that. You can accidentally cause a fungus that way that can kind of discolor the nail, make it have like a greenish appearance, but after airing your feet out and getting a certain treatment, it can go away on its own. But nail funguses are actually one of the toughest things to treat in the salon. I can say from honest experience, my grandpa had a really bad case, and you typically see these in people that have a higher than normal blood sugar. And one of the theories is that one of the environments that fungi and bacteria love are those wet, humid environments, but they also thrive on sugars. Like if we're fermenting something, we need a higher amount of sugar for the yeast to grow. The same thing is true with our body's bacteria and fungi. Sometimes our own pathogens, not our own pathogens, our own biomicrobes can infect us or cause disease if they're at an imbalance because our diet is not right. So I always recommend to do some research on that. It's pretty interesting. So my grandpa is borderline diabetic, and his toenails, one of them is like this thick, and it's super thick, super gross. It's loaded with heavy layers in there. And what could happen is the nail can crack, split, or have a really bad texture to it, and it's very difficult to care for, very difficult to clean. I know at one point he tried to clip the nail and it caused a freaking explosion. The whole nail went boom, and it was terrifying. One of them even hit the fish tank, and I think it like marked it because it was sharp. And that is something you have to be aware of when you're doing clients. Most of the time, and this comes from personal experience, we're not going to refuse service to a client in the salon because their nails are kind of gross. But if their feet are decaying or they're really, really bad, the teacher may come over and say like, look, we can't service you until you get a note by your physician saying you're fine. I'll never forget the one time I had to give someone a pedicure, and oh my gosh, I had gloves on. The odor was atrocious. We had to go in there, we had to pull out some gunk, and I'm like trying not to gag because I have a really, really weak stomach with foul smells. I'm like, and we pulled like a whole layer of gunk out. Part of her nail was like decaying, and I'm like, you really need to get this checked out. And she goes, oh yeah, I'm diabetic. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So that is something to always be mindful of. You want to know that bacterial infections in the nail plate can be identified in the early stages as yellow or green spots, but they become darker in the advanced stages. The color changes from yellow to green to brown to black, and usually when it's black, it's going to get loose and come off if it's that severe. Clients with these symptoms should immediately be referred to a physician for treatment. It is illegal for a cosmetologist to diagnose, treat a nail infection. Do not remove the nail enhancement unless directed to do so by the client's treating physician. You should never provide any type of nail services with a client with a bacterial or fungal infection. I also want to recommend you should read the overview of the nail disorders. That gives like the quick synopsis of it. That will help you with your worksheets and your test as well as your state board exam. So that was just kind of like an intro to some of the nail diseases. Now we're going to really get into the nitty gritty. There are several nail diseases you may come across, and a brief overview is found on table 10.2. Just like the disorders, this will tell you everything you need to know about what the synopsis of the disease is. You want to know that any nail disease that shows sign of infection, inflammation, redness, pain, swelling, or pus should not be diagnosed or treated in the salon. Medical examination is required of all nail diseases, and treatments should be determined by the physician. They may recommend a steroid cream. They may recommend a special, almost like a nail polish you put over fungus. Because our nail layers are very thick, especially in our toenails, the fungi may change that and make it very weak or make it very strong. And the cream or the gel that you put over it takes time to penetrate and kill the fungus. I don't know how many of you guys remember this, but there's this really, really gross, grotesque commercial that I remember as a kid in the 90s and early 2000s, where this like little fungus germ monster would lift up the toenail and go in there, and I was like, oh, I can't look at this. But if you look up some of the treatments for nail fungus, it's very, very common to have good home remedies. I know some people swear by soaking your feet in apple cider vinegar or your nails in there, it will help, and I've heard a lot of good testimonials on that. Another thing that is not mentioned in the book is you actually might see verrucas. Verrucas or warts are very common on the feet and for pedicures, and that can spread to your hands or other clients. It's a very hard virus to kill. Most of the time it's completely harmless, but just more of a nuisance. And there's so many treatments for warts, it's not even funny, as well as nail fungus. So if you know any good natural remedies, please comment down below and let me know what you've tried or what you heard and if it worked for you. So I'm gonna actually give you guys a bit of an early 5-minute break. Take a 5-minute break, we're gonna come back and we're gonna get into the nitty-gritty world of nail diseases. And we should be able to cover everything.